This is the second video in a series where we teach you how to identify the culture responsible for those strange megalithic structures. You see, this culture has been finally identified, and it is a world culture. It can be found in everyone's backyard almost, and once you understand how to see their art style and identify their items, you can go find your own artifacts to prove this yourself. How we will be identifying these is through geometry, symbolism, perspective, and damage. The whole reason this culture was ever identified was due to their strict adherence to a geometric standard. It seems like everything they made fell under certain geometric shapes and measurements. So, for example, every measurable angle that I began to measure in the beginning, like triangles or just not quite right angles, happened to fall on a degree divisible by 20. So 20, 40, 60, 80. That's it was like no in between. And that's what really caught my attention to something more industrial, something more mass produced. When I later discovered that it seemed like virtually everything was connected to this culture somehow, or like most of the things that I found in nature that were interesting looking or had very unique features were connected to this. So the geometry, even though it is one identifier, it kind of left its significance, and what became most significant happened to be damage, because without the damage, I was never able to discover the perspective, and it's through the perspective that we can truly see how it was meant to be seen. One of our first examples is my triangle stone. Now, I found this. I got stoked because it's like, oh, some paleo guy saw a pyramid on the American continent and carved it on a stone, right? There's or was faintly a second one. If you can see, but that first one you can pretty well make it out. And when you understand the damage, it's like, okay, well, this is the damage. And what are the rules about this damage? Well, a lot of times these artifacts were attached to something else, and most of the time they the damage is on the bottom and the back. And so as we look at this from now this perspective, and we can see where this damage is, well, clearly it could have been a snakehead, right? And when you analyze these two triangles, well, if you put two triangular pyramids there, well, that would be a perfect snake perspective with a staggered fang pattern. And that's one of the examples of how the damage can really open up what it truly was. And you can pretty well see, that's kind of easy. You but anybody that didn't have the larger picture would look at this and be like, "Oh man, portable rock art," which is like one of the saddest explanations I have heard for this stuff. So in reality, what this probably was where the fangs actually came off, and it's just worn away from being in the river, because most of the stuff is river finds. This is the second example. This is my fossilized dragon head, and I just thought it was concrete I was going to toss, and then I ended up seeing some interesting stuff going on. But I later learned that its damage happens to be radiused, right? And if we use that, I did that, ignore that. If we use that principle of at least to the back, right, and we flip this around, we begin to see, well, maybe that's how it was intended to be seen primarily. And if we kind of put that damage to the bottom, it seems to help us orient. And what I discovered was a lot of pieces are going to be, the damage will be to the back and to the bottom. It's not a rule, it's just often. So that's the first thing to do. So whenever you find whatever you think is damaged on these things, put it away from you and maybe to the bottom. And that might be how it was intended to be seen. Here's an obvious example. It's decently worn down, but you can see where its damage is. And it's clearly not a natural item. It's very squared off and rectangle. You can see the little eye portion, but there's its damage, and we can assume that it likely was in this way or that way. Yeah, it's probably this. But the point is like this damage tells me, okay, it was attached here, okay, and likely things are to the back and to the bottom. Here's an example that you might not really notice. It's got a lot of weird stuff going on, but that notch happens to be where it was attached. And in this case, it's just the side. Now you get into, oh, well, is it this way or is it this way? Because if it was attached here, how should it be seen? And we'll talk about that a little bit later because that gets into the shapes and the imagery. But we know, and also look at it. That's nice. That's another thing I noticed. Um, a lot of times the back of them, they're going to be flat. It's like detailless, like it was really meant to be seen from the front. I have a lot of pieces that'll be like flat on the bottom and then like a radius, or back rather. This piece is from Arizona, and you can see how geometry might help us identify this because it's really very clearly got some geometrical stuff going on. But when we talk about the damage, well, as I look at it, I don't know, like how do you tell what's damaged and what's not? Well, one of the easiest things I've learned that can help you understand what is technically the damage is observe the whole surface. What you'll notice is it's pretty much uniform. There's not a lot of disturbances. But when you get down here, we've got this little notch. And if we use our principle of at least to the bottom or to the back, it really appears like that is the notch, the attachment point. This was one of the ones that helped me realize that their attachments were usually small and strong, but when they were, involved in this cataclysm, it seems they fractured very, very easily, leaving these unique pieces. Here we have another example of just, the broken end. But what's notable about this one was glued to something. It was adhered, kind of like a mosaic, something or other. But you can faintly see what's left of the snake. You can see the pattern of his scales and his eye right there. You can also, I don't know if you can see, but there's a hexagram in there as well. Um, so that's one way to help you. I mean, this is kind of obvious. Anybody looking at that can see, oh yeah, that was a snake carving. But you can see how the damage and or glue or adhesive would be not meant to be seen. So it'll be in the back or away from the viewer because most of this, remember, is art. This piece was found in Arizona, and as you look at it, its surface is fairly uniform. He's got a geode mohawk, which is pretty cool. But his damage is right here. If we look closely, this, even though it's fairly the same, you can see how it's a fresh break through here. The surfaces are slightly different. That tells me that it was attached this direction and likely meant to be seen in some form like this. Now, another thing that I've learned, at least on some items, is that they were balanced. And what do I mean by balanced? Well, I mean they had a proper center of gravity. So, for example, this is a piece of Michigan copper. And if you look on the back, the place where it was attached is this funky little circular spot right here. And while it does appear to be multiple things in different directions, one of the things I learned is that when you put a post or something at that point and you balance it, so that it is perfectly balanced itself, like, um, let it go. And once you get that rough balance set up and you start to spin and rotate, all of a sudden you could see multiple things from that intended angle. And so I started looking at my other artifacts, and I began to notice a similar thing was happening. Like, for example, this one, you can see here where it broke. There we go. Broke off. And there really appears to be something like a disturbance on the surface. And the way I like to, I guess, think about it is, or describe it to, the non-professional, I guess, is the macaroni art or craft things you used to make in school. When the macaroni would fall off and how the glue would look when the macaroni was missing. It's almost a version of that. It'll have, like a funny smashed detail. That's not that great of an example. But what I realized is when you balance it from those points that you notice, they begin to look really interesting. And I went around to all my other ones and found similar spots on all of them. Here's one where I really had to look at this one hard. You get it nice and wet, and that'll actually make it pop a little bit. But when I realized that that point was its main attachment point, I was able to balance it on the stand I made. And so now it balances perfect. And as you walk around it, it is these two snakes fighting something. See? Cool. And so, but they're not all, that's not also not a rule. Um, but it does seem like balance is definitely a thing. This was the first one that taught me about it. Um, it's again looks just like a interesting blob, but as I was examining it, I noticed it had that nice groove, and it really looked like something was there at one point. When I put my finger on it, it balanced really well. So I ended up making this. Oh no, sucks. It goes Hongshan. All right. I ended up making this stand and realized that it very likely was in some type of tree structure or something with split branches, because once I put it in this, it just balanced perfectly, you know. And you can see the grooves of where it was pinched between something. And so determining and realizing how these things were attached to whatever they were attached to will tell you how it was meant to be seen. Let's talk about damage, or the appearance of damage that isn't. One of the things that they did was they wrapped into their art style, jagged edges. When I first found this item, I, saw this beautifully flat, straight edge, and my assumption was that, this is where it broke off. It looks faintly jagged, but overall, it's just, this rectangular piece, probably I was like, oh, saber-toothed cat or whatever, or something. There could be snake, and that's its fang. But I really thought that that was the damage. But one day, I don't even think I was really looking at it, but I caught a glimpse of faint designs. You see that? And I realized what I thought was damage was in fact not. And so I was like, where the hell was this thing attached? Like it didn't make any sense. Could it be right there? I mean, maybe. But I got to looking at this, and this was suspicious, especially this wear pattern through here. You can see how that's different right through here. And I realized what that probably is. Look at how that looks. To me, what that is a version of this. What I just did there. That's what that is. So this stuff was like, I don't know, Play-Doh, like look at that. And so this was very likely just attached on that one little spot, just like that. And when it broke, probably just broke like that. Weird. Here's another example of a Play-Doh version. It's got some nice right angles on it. And as I looked at it, some of it did look damaged and others didn't, but you could see, okay, there's clearly this is an attachment point or something was attached here. If we look over here, this mouth portion, or what I perceive to be the mouth, it kind of looks like that's the damage. So was it like that would be putting that at the bottom, or was it like, nope, like that? But either way, that's likely the back because nothing's going on. This is art, it's meant to be seen. So it's either this or it's this. But this damage, in my mind, I feel like it would be like this. So this attachment point then becomes, just like a horizontal side point. But here, that leads me to the other thing. Some of this damage, not all of it, is the attachment point. They would put stars or something depicting like a cluster of I don't know stuff. It's usually stars, is what I could make out, on attached to the mouth. So a lot of times you'll see something either broken off or a remnant of something around the mouth. This piece here is another Michigan copper example. But I originally just thought it was meant to be seen like that. It's like snake eating whatever. But I realized that this point over here, this flat kind of, nothing's going on, looks like it was smashed into something. When I stuck that on my finger and balanced it, not like this, it would be like that. And I walked around it. I realized like it started like all these. Let's see if I can do it right. There you go. So it was like it made all these funky faces as you would walk around this thing. But anyways, so I put them on stands and they started to do their thing. But the thing is like, look at the piece as a whole, examine it. What portions look different than the rest? Because I used to have this theory that everything was worn down. It was like an originally, good version of whatever it was depicting, and it was just destroyed through the cataclysm. But that's not the case. A lot of these things survived as they were in the day. For example, this is a piece from Italy. It's one of the dual chickens. It's got that guy. That's copper, Michigan copper. But this attachment point is over here. It's just a faint, dull spot, and it's better to see in person. You can faintly see it. But when you balance this thing on that spot and you walk around it, it just morphs into all these weird, like, look, it's like, was that a triceratops all of a sudden? But as you walk around these things, they look like different animals. So the whole deal was they were attached to stuff, and as you moved about life, they would morph into things like that funky AI stuff. And so to get these things to work, you have to determine how were they attached, where that attachment point was. And there is no hard rule about the attachment point. It's just generally to the bottom and to the back. That's the best thing that can get you going. And then next, we'll go into imagery that will help us to begin to understand how that damage, is to be seen. And once we get the knowledge of the imagery down, combined with understanding damage, then it actually becomes very quick after that. The whole geometry thing is really an afterthought, because their imagery is very select. Actually, it's basic. There's not a lot going on. Most of it, hell, if you start now looking at everything as a snake, you'll probably figure out most of your stuff, because the majority of these things, their primary, I guess, image is like some type of serpent or snake head with its mouth open at various degrees. Like just simply this, that's what this triangle is in some form. It represents multiple other things, but in its very most basic form, it's just a snake head. And the triangle, the back of the triangle is generally the back of the head. A lot of times we want to make the point the front for some reason, but almost always in this situation, in this culture, the point is usually the back, and it's like an open mouth of various degrees. It's like this. This is also a snake with his mouth open at a certain degree. So stay tuned for that. We're also going to have to talk about materials to some degree, which is virtually every material. And we're also going to have to talk about pigments and coatings, because it seems that they have used paints and everything, but they also use something very much like a vinyl wrap for a car. So if you've ever found something like very intricately designed in dirt, and you're like, how the hell is that possible? Like a dirt ball that had designs in it somehow, or it looked like something. Well, there's a reason for that, and you're not insane.